Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Centerville Grace podcast. Here still, actually.
We're here
with the same wonderful people that were here, 5 minutes ago, because we're recording this podcast ahead of the week's message.
Yeah.
And you'll hear it after the week's message. But because Pastor Dave is on it all the time, the message is already written. If this was Dave or Dusty or I, would we be able to do this podcast?
Not a chance.
No chance.
It's mostly written. It still needs a little work.
It's six pages.
That's Wednesdays. Well, I gotta touch it up a little bit.
How soon do you begin to write a message there, Dusty? What's your work time when you get a message to write? How much prep time are you putting into writing it?
I want to know the framework at least a couple weeks ahead of time, but I'm not going to really dig into the outline until the Monday of the week of, because I work so much better under pressure than I do not under pressure. That's the story of my life.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I guarantee I'd have it done before you would.
That's fair.
In full transparency.
I'm not going to tell people when I write my sermon.
Better not. I feel like I have to. I feel like I need to work.
I love that about you.
Like it's 4 weeks ahead of time, because I don't sleep if I can't. So if I can't get there,
It's good.
Yeah.
So instead of highlight of the week, because it's Monday and the week hasn't happened yet, what are you most looking forward to this week? What are you most looking forward to this week? Reverend?
It's my birthday on Friday.
Hey!
Happy birthday. Almost.
What are you
Almost.
doing? It's your Sabbath?
So my birthday falls on a Friday. My father's coming down, so that'll be fun to hang out with him. I don't know what Beth has planned, so
We're going to surprise him.
we'll see. I didn't hear that.
I hate surprises. What
So
about
I'm
you?
looking forward to that. Yeah.
What about you, Dust?
I actually don't know what's happening in the week yet, to be honest with you. I know that Tuesday is, of next week. Gosh, I don't know. I mean, I'll probably end up going to Kings Island. Like that's our summer thing that my oldest and I do, is we always try to find like a day a week to get down and just spend some good father-son time together. We don't have a chance to do that a whole lot during the school year, but we try to take summers and do something at least once a week where we can spend the day together.
It's nice.
Connor and I are going to go to the Indy 500 on Sunday.
Fun. Room. Yeah.
I've never been. I've heard it's a once in a lifetime kind of experience. So super excited about trying that out. We're going to leave really early Sunday morning, drive over to Indy, watch all the cars drive in a circle, and then come back.
Bring earplugs.
Protect
your hearing.
Actually, I think we're going to do over the ear hearing protection is
Nice.
what's been recommended. Go maybe or both maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I heard it'll rock your world.
It'll be loud.
So, okay, so we're continuing in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 9. So, again, if you listen to last week's podcast, you know that we covered kind of the middle of chapter 9, and right now we're going to go towards the end.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. Man, it's a lot. All right, verses 37 to 62. If you want to put a break in there, we can do that, or you can just read straight through. Completely up to you, however you want to cover it.
I can power through.
Yeah, power through. All right, let's hear it.
All right, all you listeners, hang with me. It'll be good. Just hang with me. The next day, when they came down from the mountain, a large crowd met him. A man in the crowd called out, "Teacher, I beg you to look at my son, for he is my only child." A spirit seizes him, and he suddenly screams. It throws him into convulsions so that he foams at the mouth. It scarcely ever leaves him and is destroying him. I begged your disciples to drive it out, but they could not. "O unbelieving and perverse generation," Jesus replied, "how long shall I stay with you and put up with you? Bring your son here." Even while the boy was coming, the demon threw him to the ground in a convulsion. But Jesus rebuked the evil spirit, healed the boy, and gave him back to his father. And they were all amazed at the greatness of God. While everyone was marveling at what all Jesus did, he said to his disciples, "Listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. The Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of men." But they did not understand what this meant. It was hidden from them, so they did not grasp it, and they were afraid to ask him about it. An argument started among the disciples as to which of them would be the greatest. Jesus, knowing their thoughts, took a little child and had him stand beside him. Then he said to them, "Whoever welcomes this little child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. for he who is least among you all is the greatest." "Master," said John, "we saw a man driving out demons in your name, and we tried to stop him because he is not one of us." "Do not stop him," Jesus said, "for whoever is not against you is for you." As this time approached for him to be taken up to heaven, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem. And he sent messengers on ahead who went into a Samaritan village to get things ready for him. But the people did not welcome him because he was heading for Jerusalem. When the disciples James and John saw this, they asked him, "Lord, do you want us to call fire down from heaven to destroy them?" But Jesus turned and rebuked them, and they went to another village. As they were walking along a road, a man said to him, "I will follow you wherever you go." And Jesus replied, "Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." And he said to another man, "Follow me." But the man replied, "Lord, first let me go and bury my father." And Jesus said to him, "Let the dead bury their own dead, but you go proclaim the kingdom of God." Still another said, "I will follow you, Lord, but first let me go back and say goodbye to my family." Jesus replied, "No one puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for service in the kingdom of God."
It's a lot.
Well, but they're all tied together. That's why I put them together.
No, I like it. I
Yeah,
like it.
yeah.
When you think about how they tie together, kind of give us the overview of like in the simplest version of how do all of these stories kind of tie together?
Yeah, so all of these stories highlights the different deficiencies in the disciples at this point. They lack, so many understanding. They lack empathy and compassion. They lack faith. There's just so many things they lack in this that Jesus is going to Jerusalem, but he is not going with any sort of great speed, as we're going to see. We're only in chapter still 9. But one of the reasons why perhaps he is slow playing this path to Jerusalem is because the disciples just aren't ready for him to leave yet. Like Luke is just highlighting over and over again, the disciples just aren't there yet. They'll get there, but not yet.
As we think about tying all these things together and our own deficiencies, how often do you guys think about what the disciples must have felt? Right. There are times where I can read the text and I'll be like, man, I just don't do that well at all. But I have a hard time picturing myself with Jesus being this deficient.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know how to say it without seeming. I'm not making fun of the disciples, right? That we have the gift of hindsight, which is beautiful. And I don't know. What do you think about that, Dust? What do you do with your deficiencies as it pertains to following Jesus?
I mean, it usually makes me, I'm not gonna lie, it usually makes me feel pretty good, because this is my assumption, but it's not a correct assumption. Okay. But I think a lot of times when we read texts like this, we assume that because they had Jesus there physically in the flesh, that they would have instantly just been drawn to him and done exactly everything he told them to do and really hung on to that. But what scripture illustrates right here, and it's just this beautifully human thing, is that even the people that had Jesus right there with them, they still made all kinds of bad decisions. They were still struggling with jealousy. They were still struggling to figure out who's going to be the best among us, who's going to be, can I be the best student of this teacher? And one was still going to betray him. Like, it is as human as it gets, saying that, like, even if we had Jesus right in front of us, we might not necessarily be a better follower of him. And I think that just goes back to speak to the power of what real faith is in our lives. We think, well, if I just had Jesus there and he'd just show me, then I would be living a much different life. And the reality is, like, I don't know if we would. I think that's the exercise of faith and spiritual formation in our lives right now, is we have to live as if Jesus was right there, and we have to do our best to follow him. And we might not do any better if we were right there under him.
That's good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What about you? Same thought?
Yeah, I would hope that I would do things better than the disciples, but then I'm constantly going, I actually don't.
Right.
And yes, they had Jesus, we don't, but we have his word, we have the Holy Spirit indwelling us. They had not had that yet. So, listen, I can't throw a stone at the disciples, even though it's like, how could you like blow it this much? Like, don't you know Jesus' heart? You're going to call down fire. Like, I mean, just the silliness of those two stories of, like, they didn't or they couldn't cast out this one demon out of this child, and yet they had somehow incredible faith to cast down fire from heaven on these other people. It's like that
there's a weird tension there.
There is, and I'm like, would I would hope I would do better. I would hope I know Jesus' heart better than that. But again, we have such the luxury of hindsight and the full narrative of Scripture. They didn't know what the cross meant yet. They didn't have the resurrection in mind, so it's tough. And I think this just demonstrates, like Jesus. And Isaiah talks about how Jesus was not this incredibly tall, handsome, leader of men that you just would naturally just go, yeah, of course. He had this, Isaiah was like, he didn't have this great appearance. He wasn't anything of prestige. And so it was really hard to look at Jesus and go, Son of God. It was a challenge even for the disciples to always really put their full trust in this is who you are, and this is what you've given us as authority. And so.
Oh, what's interesting is in the message this week, you highlight 5 different lacks is kind of what 5 different deficiencies. And we're kind of calling out the lack of faith, the lack of humility, the lack of inclusivity, the lack of compassion, and then the lack of priority.
Yep.
Right. And as we think about those, I'm curious, just to make it a little personal, which one do you guys struggle with the most?
I know mine pretty quickly.
What is it?
Mine's definitely compassion.
Yeah.
It's much easier to be, kind of judgmental. And, I'm not the greatest of empathizers that I know of, although I've tried to get better over time. But I'm one of those people that I very much always feel the tension of myself going, would you just do it right the first time? Why do we have to go through this over and over again? I don't understand. You dug this grave in your own life. Can you just figure it out and deal with it? And why are you making that my problem? And that's just full transparency. Full transparency.
Thank you, Pastor Dusty.
That's right.
For me, it's easy too. I'm going to go lack of humility pretty quickly. I just think people should be better.
Just do better.
Just be better.
I just sometimes I struggle with why aren't people just more like me? Which I hate to say that out loud.
Thank you, Pastor Tony.
Yeah. Can I say one really funny story before we get to Dave on that? Is we were trying to, we do a lot of board game nights, as a family. My family is incredibly competitive, but we're also very critical of one another, which says a lot to how personalities ended up. But we said, if we were ever going to do a coat of arms, what would we put on that coat of arms? And as a family, we decided our coat of arms would say, just be better.
Just be better.
So there you go.
I like it. I'm curious, which one do you think of deficiencies you see in me?
Oh, that's a dangerous game.
I know.
I'm not going to play that game. I need to see what was the beginning of the list again. Let's see.
To play.
Oh gosh. Priority, compassion, humility, inclusivity.
Well, so I might say humility as well for you, because you've talked so openly about your ego issues.
Sure.
And those would kind of go hand in glove, I would assume.
Yeah. I feel like I can relate with all of these on some level.
Sure.
Which is, I think, really interesting. But yeah.
Or humble of you.
No, I think this should say something. I don't know. I think all of us probably.
Sure. I absolutely struggle with all of these different seasons, right? The one that, I think we just called out the one that comes up the most.
Yeah. I was going to say faith, maybe. I wish I had more faith sometimes.
Really?
Yeah.
I would have lost that bet.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I certainly believe. I don't have, but there's some people the spiritual gift of faith.
Yeah,
they
sure.
just they just go all in. I'm let's slow play this a little and see how it goes.
Yeah. I mean, would you conflate that with optimism?
I think it can go
That's
together.
a great question.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. There's this all tie of faith, entrepreneurship, optimism. They all just kind of jump in and go, full bore. And I wish I had a little bit more of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
When we look at this text, one of the stories that really jumps out to me is the idea of the disciples calling down fire. You mentioned it before.
Yeah.
there's very little evidence in Scripture to suggest that this happens with any regularity.
No.
Right?
Yeah,
the only
right.
story that I can think of that's even remotely close is Baal.
Yeah.
Right? The story of Baal calling down fire there.
Talking about Elijah?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. You got any insight for us on why they think they can call down fire on Sodom and Gomorrah? I mean, what are they thinking here, right? Like, where does this come from? As you're walking along, right, like the road, where do you think, Lord, maybe we should just call down fire, right? Like, where does that, you got any historical or Bible geekness here that we can
it's interesting. It's a Samaritan village. And so, my first thought reading this was like, they had such little respect for the Samaritans and little patience for the Samaritan. They just saw them as subclass. And so this was like, let's just get rid, there's no grace here. There's no compassion. There's no let's just get rid. They're just a waste of, space here. Let's just destroy them now and move on kind of thing. So, but no, other than that, it's just so different from the heart of Jesus, right? That of course they're going to get rebuked, and they do. But I don't have any other. I don't know if they were coming off a high still from. I don't know who said it. Like, we don't know which one asked this when the disciples. Oh no, sorry, James and John. So. Maybe after the transfiguration, they're thinking a little bit more like they're got a little more power to them, and they can do something about it. But
it's scary they went there right away, though, isn't it? Like you think, like you go back in history and you think, like, how did things like the Crusades actually happen? Like, how did anybody ever think that was a good idea?
Somebody thought,
and here you have the disciples right here walking with Jesus, like, want us to destroy them? Like, that's how, guys. That's how.
Yep.
Where's that button? Oh, jeez.
Yeah, and we know James and John, they're wanting to be the greatest, right? Too.
Right.
So there's certainly a pride issue going on as well. So if you saw The Chosen, it's an interesting. If you've ever seen The Chosen, and this scene in The Chosen, it's kind of an interesting / it's a little bit humorous, but it's also like.
How do they portray it? I haven't seen it.
They're walking on the road, and some people walk by and they start picking on them and whatever. And James and John get really angry, and they're like, "You want us to call fire?" And Jesus come over here, guys. This is not the way. This is not what we do. So gives them a good rebuke. But yeah, I don't know. Beyond that, I don't know.
One of the things that we see in this through all the lacks is this idea about a good rebuke. You've used the word a couple times, a good spiritual rebuke. Jesus is pretty consistently, course correcting the disciples. As you think about modern day disciple making and through the lens of our church and through just the church in a whole, where does rebuke fit in today's ecosphere?
It's hard in our society because I think the value and the view of authority is diminishing rapidly because of we have really tried to destroy every institution there is in our culture, including church and church leadership. That to be rebuked by an authority figure is people don't receive it. I mean, it's hard to receive it in a most ideal situation, but it's really hard to receive it if you don't have much respect for authority figures over you. Yeah. So as a church pastor, as someone who has what we would say maybe spiritual authority over a church, that God-given spiritual authority, it's becoming more of a challenge to actually sit down with somebody without them just going, "I'm just up and out of here. I don't really respect your authority anyway, so I'm gone."
Dust, any thoughts on rebukes?
No, I fully agree. I mean, I think that we're not a culture built around authority figures. And you could take that all the way to its lowest level of even how we view the family, in family structures and stuff. We've devolved all the way down to even that basic structure is disappearing quickly.
Yeah.
Where, we don't view our elders as any kind of authority over us. We're very individualized. And with that individualism has come the pure destruction of any institutional authority figures. And I think that's something that we would do well to kind of reestablish the art of it happens within the art of community, right? Within community, you used to have community elders, and these were people that you would go to as a sign of respect and say, hey, I want to get your insight on this. And like I think those institutions were set up for a reason. And I don't think we're any better off because we don't have them anymore. Seems to be the opposite.
And I'll say this too, the church in the past, not all the time, but has a history of not doing this well.
Certainly abused it.
Certainly abused it. So I can totally understand why we are here where we're at in our culture. I'm just saying it just makes it harder.
Now, one of the other parts of this text that I really wanted to get your thoughts on was this idea about lack of inclusivity, right? And so there's this scene in the text where the disciples talk about someone driving out demons in Jesus's name, but he's not one of them, right? So he's not really part of the club, but he's certainly doing Jesus kind of stuff. Why do you give us some framework on why do you think Luke includes this kind of I know they're all strung together on purpose.
Yep.
But it feels pretty random.
Well, it's not. Again, if you remember Luke's big picture, message of the gospel is that Jesus is for the outsider, not just the insider, right? And here's another example, a long list of examples that we've already mentioned, so I don't need to go through all of them, but here's an outsider. He's not, as you mentioned, part of the club, not part of the 12, not a part of the 72 even, this is a guy that they don't know about, and suddenly they come to realize here he is, and he's doing what we were doing. Like, wait a minute, I thought we were the only ones allowed to do this or should be doing this, and here he's doing it. And so we try to stop him because, he's not part of us. And so Jesus, and this is so hard, and I grew up in more of a conservative theological camps, and this passage is so hard to reconcile with some of the things I was taught and brought up with as far as who's with you and who's against you, and who you should allow in your camp and who you should, work with and not work with. But Jesus says, for whoever's not against you is for you. And that's just a whole different, view of inclusivity that makes a lot of people probably uncomfortable if you really think about it. Yeah.
Sure. Any thoughts on that text, Dusty?
Yeah, I mean, it speaks to, if you're going to ask why are there, however many hundreds and hundreds of denominations that we have all around us at any given time. I just think back in light of the prayer that Jesus prayed that, all the believers would be one, is this prayer, the great priestly prayer is this prayer for unity and this prayer of acknowledgement of saying, hey, if things are going to be done for the kingdom, it's going to be as a kingdom people. And, we use this phrase a lot that hey, we're trying to build kingdoms, not castles. So if we're really kingdom people, then I would almost always argue, and this, I don't want to go down a dangerous road, but I would always argue for, let's figure out what that lowest common denominator is. Of the way I define it for myself is I want to figure out what is Orthodox Christian, what is the core essential beliefs. Here's all the B stuff that we can disagree on and probably will disagree on. But what's the basic necessity of saying I am a Christ follower and I want as many of those people on my team as possible. And, we can argue about stuff all day long. It makes for great podcasts, makes for great content, and makes for great dinner conversations, to be honest with you. But we need, if we're going to partner with God to help see the kingdom forward, and that's what God desires to do with us, we need to build much more bridges than we, separate ourselves with. But a lot of times separating ourselves is way more fun.
Yeah.
I think, there was a book that I read a couple of years ago. That was a really good book called Four, and it was by Jeff Henderson. Jeff Henderson. And I just love the idea here where it's more important for us as Jesus followers to know what we're for than what we're against, right? And so I think in this moment with the disciples, I think they're like, oh, we want to be known what we're against. We're against people who aren't with us instead of we're for the man that's driving out the demon. And I think sometimes I have a tendency to do that. And it's always one of those tension points that, I just really want to be known for what I'm for. And so I think that that's probably a really good place for most of Jesus's movements to land is, and you're not going to identify with every single thing that the movement you're part of does, right? There are things that in our church that I'm sure you don't like listeners, and you know what I mean? Like that's just part of it, but you're not here for what you don't like. You're here for what you're for.
Right.
And I think that that's pretty important. And that's what I love most about, you know, identifying with the movement on what you're for, not what you're against.
Yeah. But which one's easier at the end of the day, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And that's where we fall.
Easier, right.
Yeah. Because against, you know, you got the gossip in there. It's exciting to talk about. And like, we're much better culturally.
We get a little righteous in that too, right? Like you can be like, you can get a little fired up, like, rah, rah, you know what I mean?
Like so to know that our natural inclination always is going to be to rally, to unite people around what we're against. And if politics has taught us anything, we know that's human nature. It's always going to be easier, but I think it's worth fighting for the for.
Yeah.
For the for. That's weird to say.
And going back to your question, like, why does Luke put it here? Again, this is a string of not just deficiencies from the disciples, but this is also a string of what you would say of a list of oppositions that disciples have to face on a regular basis, right? So demonic activity and just the spiritual darkness, their pride, the busyness of life. All these currents are pushing against us, fighting, against us. And here Jesus is saying, like, it's going to be hard enough as it is. You don't want to be picking battles with people who are actually, on your, on Team Jesus.
Right.
If they're not against you, go, take it down a notch, because life is going to be hard enough as it is. So if whoever's not against you is for you, just look at them that way, because there's so much against you already. Like just take it down.
That's actually probably a really good place to end this week's podcast. A little shorter version as we're kind of leaning into the week ahead, which is unusual for us, but with Memorial Day seems appropriate. So let's get into PRs. We promised a really big PR, Reverend Holmes. You were super excited about it at the end of Las Vegas.
Yeah, Pastor Dave promised a really good PR.
Right?
I did.
Okay.
I did.
All right, what you got?
So I listened to this past week. If you like podcasts, which if you're listening to this, hopefully you do. This podcast is called Undeceptions with John Dixon. John Dixon is a professor at Wheaton. Actually, my best friend is in his doctoral program.
Oh, wow.
And he's loving it. But incredible thinker, just brilliant. But he did an episode about gospel contradictions. So this is probably 2 down now, so it's not the latest one, but it's May 12th, called Gospel Contradictions. Since I thought we were going through the book of Gospel of Luke, this answers a lot of the questions of, like, if you read Matthew, if you read Mark, if you read Luke and John, and if you see a discrepancy or a contradiction, how do you deal with that as it goes with the Gospels? And I thought what he does, and he interviews an expert in this and does a fantastic job. It is somewhat academic, but it also is very grounded too for the everyday listener to get a lot out of as well. So I just thought, man, I'm going to go back and listen to it again, I think, because it was really good and really helpful.
Dust, you got one for us?
Yeah. I would just say this is not a book. This is a spiritual practice exercise of hospitality, which is find a way to use whatever your talent or skill set is, or something you can offer. Find a way to do that within your community context. So we had a garage sale on Saturday, or 2 Saturdays ago it would have been. And I hate garage sales, but I told myself, hey, one thing I can do well is I make really good coffee, like just as a humble brag, right?
That's
I make
true,
really good
you
coffee.
do. Yeah.
You do.
So I said, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to reach out to people that come to our garage sale and some of our neighbors. We're just going to put coffee on the menu. So Declan has a lemonade stand, but we also sold lattes.
Nice.
And it created a great context for some really good conversations, because it forces people to stick around, lets us be a little bit more hospitable, and just gives us an excuse to get to know people. So once again, we're trying to dig into this art of neighboring and how can we do things better and lean into what we already enjoy. And that was a way for us to do that. So I'd recommend get to know your neighbors, figure out something you can offer them that you're really good at, whether it's a hand at, doing some yard work or handiwork, or just find a way to get to know people.
And I think for me, my PR this week would be to look at the larger church, some parachurch organizations that are really worth checking into. Our dear friend of our churches, Justin Gravett, has this new resource out called the Bicycle Illustration. It's a great look at kind of the macro picture of disciple making. If you haven't checked it out, I recommend you going to justingravett.com, check that out, and you can get the resource for free there. So I love picking up resources from our church family, but also the wider church body. I think it's so important.
It's a great tool. If you're a disciple maker, it's a great tool for your toolbox.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, friends, that's our podcast for today. As always, we are so thankful for you, our church family. If there's anything we can do to support you, please let us know. Feel free to shoot us an email. It's our first names, Dave, Tony, or Dusty at centervillegrace.org. Also, we'd love to hear your questions. So shoot us a question so that we can wrestle with it here on the podcast. And as always, the highest compliment you can give this, share this episode with a friend. Maybe somebody who you know wrestles with having lacking. That's what we talked about this week. Deficiencies. That's the word. I couldn't think of it.
Yeah.
2 for 2 on the podcast. Please hit the subscribe button wherever you listen. You know, we're having fun and we hope you are too. We'll be in touch with you guys real soon.